The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The Democratic primary could be effectively over in 1 week, depending on what happens not only tonight, we have some primaries tonight that I will talk about, but also 1 week from today on March 15th, and also over the weekend on March 12th. So let's start first with what is up tonight on the Democratic side. Tonight, Michigan votes and Mississippi votes. In Michigan, 148 delegates are at stake. In Mississippi, 41 delegates are at stake. In Michigan, Hillary Clinton is leading Bernie Sanders, according to the most recent polling we have, 59-37. And in Mississippi, Hillary Clinton is leading Bernie Sanders, according to the most recent polling we have, 63-19. Now, the reality, Lewis, is even with 148 delegates at stake in Michigan, for example, if Hillary Clinton does get about 60 to 65% of those delegates, that is not actually going to be a deciding factor in any way in terms of what is ultimately going to happen with the Democratic nomination. 1 week from today, the Democrats have Florida, Illinois, Missouri, North Carolina, and Ohio. That is 792 delegates at stake. Depending on what happens, we are either going to see Hillary Clinton mathematically become the overwhelming and clear frontrunner, making it such that Bernie Sanders needs to win something like 75% or more of the delegates from there on out in order to secure the nomination. Or we will see a situation where Bernie Sanders does get some of these big states in his corner, gets some delegates, and remains in this thing for a longer period of time. But we have to be realists here with what the math is showing us, even when we don't consider the superdelegates. And yesterday when we gave the delegate numbers, Lewis, without considering the superdelegates, half of the people emailed me saying, yeah, that made sense because we really want to focus on how people are voting. The other half said, David, superdelegates exist. So you can not include them in your little chart if you don't want to, but they exist, and we anticipate that they're going to overwhelmingly be voting for Hillary Clinton. Either way, 1 week from today, we are going to have a lot more data to tell us what does this look like. Yeah,
so it's going to happen quickly, and I hope Bernie can hang on here. Realistically, yes, the superdelegates, it's a big issue.
Are you at this point, would you say that you're still cautiously optimistic, or has your optimism waned in terms of the shot that Bernie Sanders has?
It's really been a roller coaster through the primaries so far, because at first we were all thinking Bernie doesn't really have a shot. That changed. Now it's looking like Hillary once again has a very clear edge. But I guess I am still, at least, I guess, somewhat cautiously optimistic.
The emails I'm getting right now are truly all over the place. I mean, I get people who say, David, anything other than saying Bernie Sanders has the momentum and has a great shot at winning is anti-Bernie bias, right? There's people who email me and say that. There's people who email me and say, David, this Bernie stuff has gone on long enough. Hillary Clinton is still up double digits in just about every national poll. She's up big in any relevant state that is up for primary elections in the next week. And then there's people in between who say, well, yeah, the numbers do favor Hillary at this point. She's clearly in the lead, but momentum could change, and people are Bernie's message is resonating with people. Old polling data, et cetera. It's amazing because I believe that the emails I'm getting are honest and sort of authentic from everybody. I don't believe that people are emailing me things that they wish I would say. They're just emailing me what they honestly think. And what people on the left seem to honestly think about this race right now is all over the place.
It is. And so I'm one of those people who is in the middle. Don't give me any grief for that. We've heard everybody's opinion, and we've retold it all.
I told you yesterday that the Republican primary race is not a done deal, that although Donald Trump remained in the lead with somewhere around, you know what, I don't even want to misstate the numbers, but the point was, in terms of the delegate math, Ted Cruz was right in this thing with Donald Trump, particularly with some big winner-take-all states coming up. Could the next week decide the Republican primary race? I'm not so sure. Let's see what we have on tap tonight, Lewis. Tonight we have Idaho with 32 delegates at stake. Donald Trump is ahead there. We have Michigan with 59 delegates at stake, and Donald Trump is ahead there. And we have Mississippi with 40 delegates at stake, and Donald Trump is way up there. We also have Hawaii with 19 delegates, or I guess I was corrected on Nevada. Nevada, that's the right way to say it. It's not Hawaii, it's Hawaii. I have not been pronouncing that right for, I guess, 32 years. And
How did you pronounce it?
Instead of Hawaii, it's Hawaii.
Well, I say Hawaii.
Hawaii. Interesting. In any case, doesn't even matter how we pronounce it today because we have no polling data from Hawaii that's going to tell us what's going on in Hawaii, or Hawaii. In any case, what is the situation here more broadly speaking? MSNBC's Benji Sarlin wrote an article saying this is the last week that the Republican Party has to stop Donald Trump's path to the nomination, starting with tonight's primaries and going all the way through those 1 week from tonight, March 15th, where Ohio and Florida are winner take all 1 week from tonight. If Trump wins those, at least we are looking at a contested convention, if not Trump winning the nomination outright. Do you feel, Lewis, that Trump was deflated this weekend with Ted Cruz's strong showing and that this really may not be Trump's thing anymore?
I don't think so. I think Trump is still looking relatively strong, and Cruz is definitely going to win certain states. That's just going to happen. That's a given. So Florida's big, but I'm not counting Trump out at all. I think no matter what happens, Trump is going to be in this because even if he isn't the Republican nominee, let's be real here, he's going to run as an independent.
I hope you're right. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. But before we do that, Donald Trump won a caucus in Kentucky and a primary in Louisiana, but by smaller margins than similar states like Alabama and Tennessee the week before. And we saw hugely improved performances from Ted Cruz, who won Maine and Kansas. So the dynamic does seem to be shifting. And the other issue here is two words, Lewis: Marco Rubio. The lack of momentum for Marco Rubio is a big factor in people going over to Ted Cruz. So let's talk about that next. Marco Rubio can't seem to get his presidential campaign really moving. It seems that as the less crazy of the Hispanic guys, he's not that appealing to Republican voters. If it seems that Republican voters are saying, okay, we have Trump, and then we have these two Hispanic candidates, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. And Marco Rubio is apparently a little bit too reasonable for some of the Republican base, opting instead to go with the guy who thinks that he was anointed by God to become president of the United States in order to bring about the second coming of Christ. So what do you think is holding Marco Rubio back here? Is it just the idea that he's just not nearly as extreme, and the voters who are more interested in a Cruz-Rubio type candidate are saying, well, between those two, it's clearly Cruz? Or is there something about Rubio specifically? Does he come off as inexperienced that's holding him back?
Well, he looks very young. I don't think people like that. I know it's just that's just my feeling.
He's very close in age to Cruz.
That's
in reality.
true. That's true. But he looks young. We have the water thing and the robot moments. And while he does perform well during debates, for some reason he's just not saying what people want to hear.
There are some Rubio advisors who are suggesting that he get out of this thing before Florida. Florida is Rubio's home state, and every recent poll suggests that Marco Rubio has no chance whatsoever of winning that home state, which votes a week from today, March 15th. According to a Real Clear Politics average of recent polls, Florida is tracking with Donald Trump at 42, Marco Rubio at 27, Cruz 13, and Kasich 8. There are real questions about, number one, whether mathematically Rubio can be in this thing without a strong showing in Florida. But most importantly, the optics of him losing his home state. If he gets crushed in his home state, that's not going to get him any substantial momentum here going forward.
No. And I guess it would just be about, saving yourself some embarrassment?
Basically.
But
what the line is from some advisors who have spoken on the condition of anonymity, and other advisors have denied are actually advisors, right? So there's this thing going on where some advisors that were presumably actually known to be Rubio advisors, they say his future political career is going to be drastically hurt if he gets crushed in his own state, okay?
Yeah.
That's not going to be good. So that's sort of one element to it. And then the other side of this thing is that we have a serious question around the contested convention. So the reason for Cruz staying in, for Rubio staying in, is if he can keep getting some delegates, he needs to stay in until the convention to have clout and to try to prevent Trump from getting the nomination. So that's a reason for Rubio to stay in, if you like the idea of Trump maybe running as a third party. And the way I see the path forward is Rubio stays in no matter what, right? He's got 149 or so delegates right now. That's not nothing, right? I mean, that's half of what Ted Cruz has right now. Rubio stays in, does what he can until the convention. We get to the convention, and because of Rubio staying in, Trump doesn't secure the nomination. The Republican establishment gets together at the Republican convention and, of course, gives it to someone other than Trump. Trump loses it, runs in it as an independent, and this basically single-handedly puts a Democrat in the White House. That's my sort of dream scenario. So in thinking of that path, if Rubio drops out, that path becomes less likely.
I think it's far more likely that he's receiving pressure from the Republican Party to stay in this for that reason, as opposed to him worrying about his career in the future and saving himself the embarrassment of losing in Florida. That makes way more sense to me.
Now, I want to pose an alternative scenario, which is one that another Rubio advisor put forward. A Rubio advisor came forward and said he's not getting out. He's also not going to lose Florida. If you look at the most recent Florida poll, which is a Monmouth poll released 2 days ago, it shows Rubio down to Trump 38-30. This is much closer than prior polls. That is true. I mean, the last poll had Trump up 44-28. In an average of polls, Rubio is still down 15. But the angle is Florida is Marco Rubio's home state. His base is going to come out. His supporters are going to come out, and he is going to come back. He's already closed the lead to 8 in the most recent poll, and he only has to close basically a fraction of 1 point something points per day from now until the election, and he's right in this thing. It's possible. It's possible.
Yeah. Let's not count it out. Depends what polls you want to look at. If this Monmouth poll is accurate, okay, sure, he's in it.
All right, we will take a break. Send me your thoughts about the Rubio thing. Send me your thoughts about what's going on with Bernie and Hillary. Where are you on it? I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at lewismotamedy. And we have so much more planned for you today, including a fascinating interview with Alice Dreger coming up later.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The David Pakman Show is funded directly by viewers and listeners like you. Today's new member of the day is Kimberly Hughes. Kimberly, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Kimberly and get instant access to all of the fantastic and tremendous member benefits at davidpakman.com/membership. And remember that if you ever shop on Amazon.com, the shopping you do can support the work we do if you go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you do your shopping. Okay, I have some interesting videos to play for you. Let's start with Bernie Sanders. At a rally in Michigan yesterday, presidential candidate Bernie Sanders had a lot to say about marijuana. A lot of it was predictable and expected, but in his speech, he openly admitted to having smoked marijuana. He went into detail, saying he tried smoking pot twice in his life and that it made him cough a lot. Let's listen to Bernie commenting about his marijuana experiences.
Now, everybody here knows, I know, that heroin is a killer drug, and we got to stay away from heroin, and we got to do everything that we can to make sure our kids do not get addicted to heroin. We also know, and people can argue with us till the cows come home and scientists dispute it, marijuana is not heroin. Now, I'm not here advocating for marijuana. I've done marijuana twice in my life when I was very young. And what it did for me is it made me cough a lot. That was my response. But I gather other people have had different experiences. I don't know. Marijuana is listed as a Schedule I drug alongside of heroin. I agree. And that is why I believe we should take marijuana out of the federal control.
Okay, so let's break this down piece by piece, Lewis. First of all, the admission that he smoked marijuana twice. I mean, what you're supposed to say is, I did it once and I didn't inhale and it gave me a headache and, it's bad. This would have been a huge controversy years ago, and it still is to some people, but it's not to nearly as many people, right? I mean, who really cares? And the question I have for you is this not a big deal, broadly speaking, because it's Bernie and everybody sees him as a sort of hippie from Brooklyn and Vermont or whatever? Or is it not a big deal because just attitudes have changed drastically about marijuana?
Attitudes have changed drastically, and not just attitudes. People aren't afraid to lie about it anymore.
They're not afraid to lie about it.
Yes, about how their attitude towards marijuana, because as we know, there have been many hypocrites out there who use it and condemn it at the same time.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay, yes. And so certainly this is not an issue for anyone who is going to vote for someone with a D next to their name.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And the real issue is the latter part of what Bernie talks about, right? The scheduling of marijuana as a Schedule I drug being used to put people, disproportionately non-white people, in prison. According to the DEA's website, Schedule I drugs are, quote, defined as drugs with no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Schedule I drugs are the most dangerous drugs of all the drug schedules with potentially severe psychological or physical dependence. Who really believes that marijuana fits in that category, right? As you know, Lewis, I think smoking anything is bad for you, right? The act of smoking anything, even if you're smoking banana peels or whatever, right? I mean, the smoking is bad for your lungs. But how can anyone say that marijuana is in the same category as heroin? And how can anyone say marijuana fits that definition of a Schedule I drug?
Well, I agree. Don't inhale smoke. But you can eat this stuff. You can consume oils. You can vaporize any number of ways. And the benefits, Dave, are incredible. The stuff we are learning now about the medical applications of everything that is contained in pot is really incredible.
It amazes me how American politicians seem to be not only scared of having a history of drug use, but also scared of even saying that, hey, science actually knows quite a bit about both THC and the cannabinoids in marijuana. We know so much about what's going on, and there clearly are medicinal uses here. The extent to which we're going to be able to exploit these, whether marijuana is some kind of miracle drug or just another tool that we should have in our sort of satchel, for lack of a better proverbial term, that is sort of a debate that we can have. But shying away from saying there are obviously huge potential benefits here, some we've already seen on a smaller scale, it seems completely disconnected from reality.
Mm-hmm. And, Bernie's not going to convince conservatives by saying this type of thing.
No.
I think many of those conservatives believe that anyone who is using this stuff should be in prison.
Right, especially if you're not white.
Yeah, but what is going to speak to conservatives and Republicans is the financial aspect of this.
Do you think so?
And the revenue that their states can bring in by legalizing this stuff.
I know, but here's the thing. When we talk, you would think that when you sit down a conservative, if they're against something, you could say, hold on a second, think of the money. And all of a sudden they go, oh, you know what? That makes sense. We've seen with issues of healthcare, health insurance, they don't seem to care that it's more expensive to have uninsured people who use the emergency room as their doctor's office, right? The financial argument doesn't seem to matter because of the morality that if you can't afford healthcare, you don't deserve to have it, and therefore you don't deserve to have treatment. That seems to hugely supersede the financial element. I know a lot of these liberal ideas are financially very, very conservative, but the conservatives don't seem to care.
Well, I think what you're going to see as more states legalize this stuff is powerhouse companies like the big tobacco companies. I believe they are going to start lobbying for the legalization of recreational use because they have the most to gain, and their lobbying power, as we know, is incredible.
We will follow it, you know that. A former Baltimore police officer was acquitted of animal cruelty charges after he slit a dog's throat. He will receive $45,000 in back pay from city government. The story is very, very controversial. The officer is Jeffrey Bolger, 50 years old, and he is going to get payment for about 10 months of paychecks that he missed while he was on unpaid leave from the police department. The Board of Estimates is expected to approve that payment tomorrow. Now, the backstory on this is that in November, Baltimore Circuit Judge Melissa Finn ruled that prosecutors failed to prove that Bolger was criminally responsible for the death of a 7-year-old Sharpay named Nala when he slit the dog's throat in June of 2014. Bolger was initially charged with mutilating an animal, animal cruelty, and misconduct in office. Police commanders said the killing of the dog was outrageous and unacceptable, but the judge said the evidence indicates the officer is acting in the interest of safety, was acting in the interest of safety, and that he believed he was putting the dog out of its misery. So let's talk about this, Lewis. The story is Nala's owner, Sarah Gossard, said her dog escaped through a gate in her Canton backyard in June of 2014. The dog ends up in Brewers Hill and bites a woman on the hand, superficial wound, okay, not a deep wound, not defending it, just telling you it was not a deep wound. The woman calls police to help capture the dog, and officers of the emergency services unit, which handles these dangerous animal calls, and they have these dog control poles, they show up. Now, people are really, really upset, saying, hey, how was this guy found criminally not liable here? There are sort of two sides to the story. Side one is, the judge said, you know what? After the dog had been secured to the dog control pole, which puts the dog on basically a 6-foot radius, the officer acted properly in slitting the dangerous dog's throat. Now, the obvious reaction to that, Lewis, is, wait a second. If the dog has already been secured to the dog control pole and has a 6-foot radius, why would you need to slit the dog's throat? The dog is already under control. The lawyers for the police officer argued that what happened is the dog basically strangled itself once attached to that dog pole, and thus it was a sort of something that the officer did to put the dog out of its misery, to slit the dog's throat because the dog had basically killed itself already and either was actually dead or almost dead. Will we ever know the truth in a story like this? I don't really know. I mean, people are just absolutely furious. There's people who say this guy did nothing wrong. The dog strangled itself. We don't have video of it. Where do you go with something like this?
Yeah, without the video, it's hard to say. I would say that it's just very strange because you hear of plenty of cops shooting dogs. Maybe he just thought it was better not to draw his gun at all in this case. If the defense, if his attorneys, if his lawyers were going to create some type of plausible defense around this poll, I can't think of anything else it would be. So this seems like the logical place for them to go with their defense, but I certainly don't like it. I think there's a lot of shady stuff about this story.
The other piece of evidence from the trial that doesn't really add up, if you believe it was sort of euthanasia line, is that multiple witnesses say they saw the officer hold down the dog in order for Bolger to slit its throat. And you would say, if you couldn't even tell whether the dog was almost dead or dead, would the dog need to be held down? But maybe we're getting a little bit too deep into this, Lewis. I don't know. It just strikes me as odd.
Another strange detail. So I wish that maybe someone did. I wish someone took out their cell phone and started recording this entire thing, because that's what people need to do. Anytime they see something going down, take out your phone, start recording. It's the most important thing you can do, and make sure you stay away, whatever the distance is, has been legislated. On
our YouTube channel on the clip for this story, we will link to a couple of stories about it. Take a look. Send me what you think. I spent a while this morning reading the different accounts, and I can't say anything definitive. And as Lewis says, the story presented by Bolger's attorneys is the most plausible explanation for why he ended up slitting a dog's throat that was already secured to a dog control pole. But does that mean that it's true, or does that mean that this guy has really good attorneys? I don't know the answer to that. Discuss it with us on Reddit. We are on Reddit, davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Quick break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Alice Dreger, historian of sexuality and author of Galileo's Middle Finger, Heretics, Activists, and One Scholar's Search for Justice. The book is so interesting, and it deals with, of course, science and research. It deals with history. It deals with bias, both political and within the science world. Tell me sort of generally what led you to become interested in these areas.
Sure. Thanks for having me, David. Basically, I had been a patient rights activist for people with intersex. That's when people are born not with the standard male type or the standard female type anatomy, but something in between. And after years of doing that work, I started doing work on a transgender controversy within the sciences. And a group of transgender activists actually came after me, which was a little disorienting because I had been doing LGBT rights work. And after they came after me, I started realizing the extent to which researchers are in danger, because if they dare to say something that offends a political identity group, they can be set upon by mobs and attacked and actually have their work really undermined. So I started setting out across the country, talking to different researchers about what had happened to them. And these are typically people who are left of center, but who had the experience of leftist groups coming after them.
And we've been sort of dealing with this in a number of different ways. We've been talking about censorship on campus. We've been talking about sort of so-called progressives sometimes defending illiberal or not progressive principles, and we've sort of gone at it from a couple of different ways, but you're coming at it from a very particular point of view, which includes college campuses, not only from the student side, but also from the research side. Talk to us a little bit, or maybe give us some examples of what types of work you saw sort of stifled either for political correctness reasons or for some other political reason.
Sure. So one example would be the work done by the anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon. He was very interested in trying to figure out what is the basis of human nature, and he was attacked by people who thought that he was basically saying that our natural state is to be violent and drug using and abusing of women, which to some extent he was saying, but he had the American Anthropological Association do a 2-year prosecution basically of him that I show in the book was really false, that they knew from the beginning that the charges made against him weren't true, but they decided to hold it up as an example of proving that they cared about indigenous people, so they had to attack Chagnon for his ideas. In addition, I look at what happened with Randy Thornhill and Craig Palmer, who were two researchers who looked at the biological bases for sexual coercion, including rape. They were challenging the classic feminist ideal that rape is primarily about power, not about sex. And they were trying to show that, in fact, sometimes it is about sex. And they were doing that in order to try to help prosecute rape, prevent rape, help rape victims, not because they were pro-rape in any way, but they were set upon by lots of mobs. I looked at Chuck Roselli, who was interested in the question of why some sheep, male sheep, only want to have sex with other male sheep, and he was set upon by LGBT activists, as well as PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, which is an animal rights group. Elizabeth Loftus, who looked at childhood sexual abuse and the way that sometimes memories are actually implanted in kids, not actually recovered. And she was set upon by various people who insisted that no, recovered memory syndrome is always real. So basically, I was trying to trace out what happened to all these people because the ideas they put forward were challenging, which is really why the book is called Galileo's Middle Finger, because it's the idea of the researcher pushing against a common dogma, even when they are at risk personally for doing so.
And in researching you, I mean, of course, everybody has personal biases and motivations for whatever they do, but in some of these cases, you were sort of defending research that maybe in some ways, or at least superficially, might have been seen as going against your own values, right? I mean, with the example, from my understanding in researching and preparing for this interview, you consider yourself a feminist, but you were against some of the feminist censorship of that research into sexual violence because it was the principle of it, if I understand correctly.
Absolutely. And that's where I come down in the book, is the idea that whatever our political points of view are, at the end of the day, where we have to really come together is the idea that we should look for truth in the world, that we should look for reality, and that sometimes science is going to tell us stuff we don't want to hear. That's actually how we know it's working, when it tells us stuff we don't want to hear. And so in the book, really, I come down on the side of saying, you know, I'm still a feminist, I'm still somebody who does LGBT rights activism, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I think we have to face facts. The reason being, we cannot have sustainable social policy if we're not reality-based. And much as we might want to believe that, for example, rape is about power and it isn't about sex, if it is about sex, then we need to know that in order to deal with rape. So I very much come down on the side of believing that freedom of research, freedom of speech, freedom to inquire where you need to go is where we have to go to be a healthy democracy. And it really bothers me that a lot of liberals on campuses think the solution to discomfort is to shut people down. I think the solution to discomfort is to have more of it.
So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about sort of finding balance between a couple of positions that sometimes are problematic. You know, sometimes we hear the sort of defense of asking leading or unsubstantiated questions or furthering ideas that we've already done a lot of research into by saying, hey, I'm just asking questions. We should all be allowed to ask questions. So I'm sort of aware of the way in which I'm just asking questions can be misused. At the same time, the name is escaping me, but I'm guessing you remember this incident where someone at Harvard said something about exploring whether there is something inherent to women or men being better or worse in certain fields, and women in math was mentioned. Does this ring a bell to you?
Larry Summers, the president of Harvard.
Larry Summers, exactly. Okay. I thought that there was a really interesting sort of debate there, because if it were true that there were some biological basis for women being not as good at math or men being not as good at something else, it would be really important for us to know that in thinking about our culture and society. Now, if that has already been studied front and back and there is absolutely nothing to explore there, I could see how bringing it up could be something worthy of criticism. But wouldn't some of these questions be questions we should have answered?
Yeah, I think sex difference questions are really important. And what the problem is when people think that when you're describing an average difference, that somehow you're concluding that everybody is different in that way. So sex differences, we know, are actually average differences, and that some people will be on opposite sides. Also, we know that developmentally, you can actually change somebody's outcome in terms of being able, for example, to improve math skills in particular ways. And actually, that's part of the reason why sex difference research is valuable, because one of the things it can show us is that, for example, girls may not learn math as well in a system that's been designed for boys, but that if you explain math to them in a particular way that addresses more perhaps the way that they're seeing the world, the way they're being treated in the world, they may actually excel at math quite a lot. And so sex difference research can actually help us understand how to do better teaching for all the populations. One of the things we find, for example, is that boys tend to have more narrow interests in terms of where they are in the world. So how do we help boys explore more broad interests, for example? If we deny that there is a sex difference there, then we're not able to begin to address how we can make life better for people, how we can make more people go into the sciences, go into the maths. So I think there's a really good reason to study that kind of stuff, and we don't need to be afraid of it. Just because science tells us that something exists in the world doesn't mean that's the way it has to be. Certainly science tells us, for example, that infanticide has been common historically in terms of taking care of your enemy's children. Murdering them has been common, historically speaking. But that doesn't mean we have to live that way, right? We can say to ourselves, in a civilized society, we don't target civilians. And we're capable of that kind of change. So I don't think we have to be afraid of science telling us things as much as people have thought we have to.
So, point taken, absolutely. These are hugely important areas of research. Now, the question I have is, how can we balance that with those who want to go further and say, well, if we did find that out in the research, then we should actually take a path that is more divisive than productive. The idea that we shouldn't care if we aren't seeing enough or the number of women that we would expect in a particular field, for example, because oftentimes valuable research, and there's no doubt that you're talking about valuable research and questions that we should be asking, is misused in a way that is hugely destructive. So how can we prevent that from happening?
I think that's part of what academics should be studying and evidencing, is the way that that kind of stuff gets misinterpreted and misused in ways that are ultimately harmful. You know, it is true, we all do have biases in our work. And that's part of the reason why diversity within research is really important, because people coming from different points of view have the potential to see different blind spots, see different ideas, have potential for different metaphors to be brought to bear that then help you figure out what new questions to ask, where you might look for the answers. So really, when you have something like what we find is that there are particular particular kinds of sex differences, maybe in terms of, for example, spatial relations. That doesn't tell us then that we should not have men and women read maps, right? What it does tell us is that we may read maps differently and that we have an ability to sort of grow that idea and figure out ways to all succeed in the world. And I think anybody who takes differences that are on average and assumes, therefore, you can apply them individually is just somebody who doesn't understand the research and needs a better education.
Can you talk a little bit in the last few minutes we have about the sort of different pressures that are impacting issues of free speech on campus and sort of the search for truth within what we consider to be a democratic system? You know, I get emails from people who say that it's primarily economic pressures that are really impacting many of these issues. Others say, you know, it's really political correctness. It's not so much an issue of money. Can you shed some light onto that?
So we've talked a little bit about the progressive problems, but I think it's very serious that we see in states where Republicans are in power that they're actively shutting down university units that do interesting work in political areas that they don't want to hear. So, for example, at the University of North Carolina, Gene Nichols' Center on Poverty was shut down by the state legislature, essentially, because he dared to look into the ways in which governmental policies led to greater poverty problems. So we do see governmental pressure in ways that are very dangerous, I think, in terms of interference. The other thing we do have is the economic pressures, and that includes reduction of national research funding. National research funding allows people to do work without having to take corporate money, and corporate money, we know, tends to skew results. And so we get better science, frankly, out of national funding, and that's been crunched. But then in addition to that, we see problems like I had at Northwestern, where universities become obsessed with branding. And when they become obsessed with branding, any kind of dangerous idea that's out there that might upset somebody is something that's squashed down, both in terms of teaching, writing, research. And I saw that in my own case where my work was censorship because I was talking about sex and disability. So those are all the kinds of pressures that exist. I mean, there are others as well, but they're major pressures now. And I think it's really important for academics to take seriously their duty to other people in our democracy and work really hard on protecting academic freedom and free speech so that we can continue to have debates, disagreements, arguments in which we progress forward.
We've been speaking with Alice Dreger, historian of sexuality, author of Galileo's Middle Finger, Heretics, Activists, and One Scholar's Search for Justice. Super interesting book and just a really important topic. Thanks so much for talking to me about it.
Thanks, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We know that the destructive reach of Wisconsin Republican Governor Scott Walker extends pretty far. It includes destroying labor unions. It includes destroying collective bargaining, hurting Wisconsin schools, Koch brother cronyism, so much more. But we now know that it also extends to the Supreme Court. Scott Walker recently appointed Rebecca Bradley to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and it's been uncovered, very quickly, mind you, that she once wrote articles calling gay people queers and arguing that anybody who contracts AIDS deserves it. The governor first named her to the Milwaukee County Circuit Court in 2012. Then he elevated her to Wisconsin Court of Appeals in May of 2015. And in October, when a vacancy arose on the state Supreme Court, Walker again appointed her. She is now up for a full 10-year term when voters head to the polls on April 5th. The liberal group One Wisconsin Now released a column, actually a number of columns that Bradley wrote in 1992 for the student newspaper at Marquette University, urging her to resign from office. And in one column, she criticized people trying to bring attention to the AIDS epidemic. Let's put up a quote that she had written here in this piece. Quote, "But the homosexuals and drug addicts who do essentially kill themselves and others through their own behavior deservedly receive none of my sympathy." She also said that it would be better to get AIDS than cancer because since it's a politically correct disease, it's going to be better funded and you can be more likely to expect to survive, I guess. Also, as I mentioned, referring to gay people as queers. She was asked about these claims and she put out a statement. And now, to her credit, Lewis, she said, "I'm embarrassed by these things I wrote. They have no bearing whatsoever on me as a judge today, and they have no bearing whatsoever on my current views." And she also accused One Wisconsin Now of a mudslinging campaign to distract people from issues. This is really the issue to me, Lewis. Is it mudslinging to publish something that somebody wrote verbatim, right? Is that mudslinging? You're just publishing what they wrote. At the same time, how far back should people be held responsible for things that they said? In this particular case, she was in college at Marquette and wrote this in the student newspaper. I don't think quoting someone verbatim is mudslinging, but there is a legitimate question about whether this should matter and whether she wrote this in some kind of confused situation. Cenk Uygur from the Young Turks used to be a huge right-winger. He wrote a whole bunch of right-wing stuff in college. We know he doesn't believe it anymore. So should he still face consequences as a progressive today? Not that this woman is a progressive, by the way, because of things he wrote in college. It's a similar sort of question. She says she doesn't believe any of this stuff.
I can't say with certitude that she does believe any of this stuff. I guess we can take her at her word. And so I don't know if I can put an exact age on when we can allow people to forget about things people have said. So my question would be, what type of person would Scott Walker appoint? And I think that is pretty clear.
Yeah, the damning thing is that, oh, by the way, Scott Walker appointed someone who wrote this type of stuff. That's really the thing that sort of corroborates the narrative that already is pre-existing. Send me your thoughts on this. I mean, she says she doesn't stand by it. So should we basically say there's no consequence or criticism that is valid anymore? Or do we say, well, what evidence do we actually have that she doesn't believe this stuff anymore, other than the fact that she said she doesn't? A jury has awarded a sports journalist, Aaron Andrews, $55 million in a lawsuit. Now, Lewis, I think we covered this initially when it happened years ago. Aaron Andrews went to a hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, and Michael David Barrett was stalking her, used a hacksaw to tamper with her room's peephole, and recorded video of her naked back in 2008. This led to huge drama, a huge lawsuit, etc. And the jurors in this trial found in Aaron Andrews' favor. The hotel and Michael David Barrett have been told by the jury that they will need to pay a total of $55 million to Aaron Andrews. Interestingly, afterwards, the jurors were taking pictures with Aaron Andrews, and she signed autographs, according to reports from the courtroom. So who knows what the celebrity effect factor was here in influencing the jury's decision. The jury said, okay, Barrett is 51% at fault, and West End Hotel Partners, the ownership group that operates the Nashville Marriott where this happened, is 49% at fault. So they'll split the $55 million award 51 to 49. There's so much to discuss here. First of all, Lewis, $55 million. What's your reaction to that?
That is quite a bit of money, and it seems way, way too high, I think. Would you agree with me on that?
It strikes me as very high. However, when you actually research this, if you see what's happened to punitive damages in the court system, if you understand that the award is absolutely going to be appealed, if you understand that this Barrett dude probably doesn't have anywhere near this amount of money,
right,
how much money is she actually going to get? We don't really know the answer. Additionally, there's a real question here about whether the hotel is at all responsible. The reason the hotel is allegedly responsible is that they didn't do a good enough job of shielding Aaron Andrews' hotel room number from Barrett, who was trying to obtain it. Now, he didn't go to the front desk and say, hi, I'd like Aaron Andrews' room number. He was sort of coy about it and did some pretty good social engineering, where he first asked to be connected to her room on a hotel phone and watched the hotel employee tap in the number. Once he knew her hotel room, he called and asked to book the hotel room next to her, but he didn't say, I want the room next to Aaron Andrews. He said, if she was in room 308, I want room 310 or whatever it would be that's next to her. So that's the other question here. How liable, how guilty is the hotel in all of this? And there's big controversy about that as well.
Yeah, just hearing the details from you, I would not think that the hotel can really be held responsible for this.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. I think you can pretty much place this all on the stalker.
The jury awards are often reduced dramatically on appeal. Both sides often settle for way less. Both sides are going to be aggressive here, and an appeals court judge might even say, this is outrageous, you have to retry it. We will see. For now, a $55 million verdict for Erin Andrews, and not to understate the absolutely horrible and invasive and criminal actions that she was a victim of here. I mean, no doubt about it. It's just $55 million is a lot of money.
Yeah, 55 million. Dave, I think I might book a room at this hotel and tell everyone that I'll be there.
I mean, I know you're joking, but the reality is there are medical malpractice successful claims where people are horrible things happen to them, and they don't even get a fraction of this amount of money. And
Okay.
It's not about one type of victimhood versus another.
Yeah.
But we have a context we need to think about here.
How about people that are falsely imprisoned for decades?
And get 20 grand a year.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's completely nuts. But that alone shouldn't tell us that Erin Andrews wasn't a victim here. She absolutely was, and this is absolutely horrible, horrible crime. I have a voicemail number that is 219-2-DAVID-P. A question for Lewis in the voicemail today.
Hey, David. Hey, Lewis. This is Tim from Pennsylvania. I got a question for Lewis. Lewis, I know you're into black metal. Just wondering, what are your favorite black metal bands? I recently saw Mayhem from Norway open for Watain in Philly, and
Right.
It was pretty amazing. One of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. So, yeah, I love the show, guys. Keep up the good work. Let me know. Bye.
Okay.
Lewis, your favorite now he wants to know black metal specifically.
Yeah, black metal specifically. So my answers are not going to be traditional, really,
Good.
when it comes to black metal. But
Good.
my three favorite black metal bands, or people describe these bands as black metal, one of them absolutely, is Panopticon, Agalloch. Some people might disagree that that's black metal. I think most people call it black metal. And Blut au Nord. Those are my top three.
And are those all American bands?
A Panopticon is, yeah. Well, Agalloch is too. Actually, they're from the United States. Blut au Nord is from France. Right.
All right. So Lewis's favorite black metal bands. Glad to answer questions on the voicemail segment. On the bonus show today, a 99 million year old lizard is preserved in amber. A gun safe is opened with a paperclip. And the new blackest material on the planet has been developed. All of those stories and more, davidpakman.com/membership.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.